The first time I stepped into my son and daughter-in-law's new house, I didn't imagine that one day I'd own it myself. I remember carrying a basket of fruit and a smile, excited to see how well they'd settled in. My son, Ethan, greeted me with warmth, pulling me into a hug the moment I walked through the door. But his wife, Megan, stood a few feet away, arms crossed, lips tight in a forced smile. I brushed it off at first. She'd always been particular about her space, organized, minimalist, and, in her words, modern. I was the opposite. I loved the smell of old books, the clutter of family photos, the feeling of a lived-in home. Maybe that's why she never liked me much. I was a reminder of everything she didn't want her life to resemble. It started small. The comments, the looks, the small size whenever I came over. But that day was different. I'd come to stay for a week after my knee surgery. Ethan had insisted. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone," he'd said. "We've got the guest room ready for you." But when I arrived, the guest room wasn't a room anymore. It was a converted office, filled with boxes and Megan's workout equipment. "We had to make some adjustments," she said with that clipped tone of hers. "You can just sleep on the floor in the living room." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. "The floor?" I repeated softly, glancing at Ethan. He looked uncomfortable. "Babe, maybe Mom could use the couch?" "The couch is leather," she shot back. "It'll ruin the material if someone sleeps on it." She turned to me with a tight, polite smile. "It's just for a week, right?" The air felt heavy. My son's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked torn between his mother and his wife. And me? I felt a sting deep in my chest. Not just from her words, but from how small they made me feel. That night, I spread out a thin blanket on the wooden floor, the cold biting through it. The sound of them laughing upstairs, her laughter especially, echoed through the house. I stared at the ceiling, the ache in my knee pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. And I thought, how did it come to this? But life has a strange way of turning pain into power. At that time, I didn't know that the humiliation of that night would become the seed of something much greater, something that would shake their perfect little world. Because here's the thing, while Megan saw me as an inconvenience, she didn't know that I wasn't as helpless as she thought. I had built a life of quiet savings, wise investments, and a deep understanding of people, especially those who underestimate others. So, when she told me to sleep on the floor, she had no idea she was laying the groundwork for her own downfall. It all began 2 weeks later when Ethan called me, his voice tired and uncertain. "Mom," he said, "Megan's been stressing about the mortgage. There were some issues with the down payment paperwork. We might have to refinance." My heart skipped. "What kind of issues?" He hesitated. "Apparently, the seller's company is changing ownership. Something about a delayed title transfer. Megan's freaking out because it might affect the loan approval." I felt a chill. I asked him to send me the details, just to see if I could help. But deep down, I already had an idea forming. A quiet counterattack born from the memory of that cold floor. And when I read through the documents, the opportunity was staring right at me. The house, their house, was still under a temporary holding company's ownership due to the delayed transfer. Meaning, until the sale was finalized, anyone with the funds could buy it outright. It was a rare situation, and one that Megan's arrogance had opened wide for me. I spent that night thinking, replaying her words over and over, "Sleep on the floor." And by morning, my decision was made. I called my lawyer, a friend I'd known since college. "Can you find out the status of this property?" I asked. "And, if possible, help me make a quiet purchase." He chuckled softly. "You're up to something, aren't you, Clara?" "Let's just say," I replied, "it's time to stop sleeping on floors." What followed over the next week was a carefully executed plan. Quiet, deliberate, and, if I'm being honest, deeply satisfying. When Megan noticed me visiting the neighborhood again, she looked irritated. "Back again?" she said, fake sweetness dripping from her words. I smiled. "Oh, just running some errands nearby." She didn't know that inside my bag were signed documents, sealed contracts, and the beginning of a story that would make her jaw drop. By the end of the week, the house she so proudly lorded over was no longer hers. It was mine. But I didn't tell them yet. No, not yet. Timing, after all, is everything. For now, I let them enjoy their illusion of power. Let her believe she was still in control. Because when I finally revealed the truth, I wanted it to hit her where it hurt the most. Not her pride, but her sense of security. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than revenge. And sometimes, the best way to fight back is to let karma wear your smile. The day after I bought the house, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. There was something quietly powerful about knowing I'd reclaimed my dignity without a single shout or argument. Megan still thought she was in charge of everything. The house, Ethan, even how I should fit into their lives. But now, every time I looked at her, I carried a secret she couldn't begin to imagine. Over the next few days, I went about life as usual. I visited my friend Susan for coffee, took my walks in the park, and spent evenings organizing some old documents. The deed was in my possession now, signed and sealed under my name. I was the legal owner of the house that Megan had once proudly called her dream home. It would have been easy to confront her right away, to show up, wave the papers, and say, "Surprise!" But that wasn't my style. No, I wanted the moment to mean something, not just for her, but for Ethan too, because he needed to see who she truly was. I waited. I waited for the perfect moment, when her pride would be at its highest, because only then would the fall hurt enough to be remembered. A week later, that moment arrived. Ethan invited me for dinner. "Mom, Megan wants to make things up to you," he said over the phone. "She feels bad about, the floor situation." I almost laughed, but I held it in. "That's thoughtful of her," I replied gently. "Of course I'll come." When I arrived that evening, Megan greeted me with what could only be described as performative politeness. The table was beautifully set, candles lit, wine glasses shining. She wore an apron that said "Queen of the Kitchen," which made me chuckle inwardly. "Clara," she said sweetly, "we wanted to start over. I think we got off on the wrong foot." "I'd like that," I said with a smile, though deep down I could see right through her. She wasn't sorry. She was simply trying to keep the peace now that the mortgage trouble was unresolved. We sat down to eat, and she spent the evening talking about her design projects and plans to renovate the guest area. I listened quietly, occasionally nodding, and watching how Ethan admired her, oblivious to the little digs she threw at me. At one point, she looked at me and said, "Clara, when we redo the living room, we'll probably need to get rid of those old chairs you gave us. They're a bit outdated for our aesthetic." I smiled. "Oh, I don't mind. After all, the house belongs to you, for now." She blinked, confused for a second, then forced a laugh. "Of course. Well, until it's fully paid off, I guess." "Right," I said, my tone calm but deliberate. "Ownership can change faster than you think." For the first time that night, she seemed uneasy. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to figure out whether I meant something by it. After dinner, Ethan walked me to the door. "Thanks for coming, Mom," he said warmly. "I think she's trying." I placed a hand on his arm. "I know you love her, Ethan. Just make sure she loves you, not for what you can provide." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" I gave him a small, knowing smile. "You'll understand soon enough." That night, I made one more call to my lawyer. "File the ownership transfer with the county records tomorrow," I told him. "Let's make it official." The next morning, I received the confirmation email. Property ownership recorded under Clara Hastings. And that's when I began preparing for the reveal. A few days later, Ethan called again. His voice was tight. "Mom, the bank sent a notice about the refinance. They said something about the title being transferred." Megan's freaking out. I could hear her in the background, her voice sharp like broken glass. "What do you mean it's transferred? To who?" I took a breath. "Well," I said calmly, "maybe you should come by my place. We can talk in person." They arrived within the hour, Megan storming through the door first, her expression somewhere between panic and fury. "Clara, do you know anything about this?" she demanded, waving the papers in my face. I pretended to glance at them. "Oh, those? Yes, I suppose I do." Ethan looked confused. Mom, what's going on? I stood up, walked to my desk, and retrieved the deed. Then, slowly, deliberately, I placed it on the table between us. This, I said softly, is what's going on. Megan grabbed the paper, her eyes darting across it. Then she froze. This says you own the house. That's correct, I said. The sale was finalized before your refinance went through. I simply stepped in to help. Ethan blinked, still processing. You bought the house? I did. I looked at him gently. You mentioned you were struggling with the paperwork. I didn't want you two to lose your home, so I took care of it. Megan's face turned red, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. You can't just own our house. We live there. Well, I said softly, technically, you rent it now. The silence that followed was sharp and heavy. Ethan looked between us, speechless. Megan's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find the right insult but couldn't. Then, in a cold, clipped voice, she hissed, You did this to humiliate me. I met her gaze evenly. No, I did this to remind you that respect is earned, not demanded. You told me to sleep on the floor. Now you'll understand what it feels like to lose your comfort. Her jaw tightened. You think this is revenge? I smiled faintly. No, it's a lesson. Ethan rubbed his forehead. Mom, what are you planning to do now? Oh, nothing drastic, I replied. I'll let you stay. But from now on, you'll treat that house and the people in it with gratitude. And with that, I handed him the keys. These belong to you, Ethan. But remember who they came from. Megan was silent for the rest of the visit. Her arrogance had vanished, replaced by something I hadn't seen in her before. Fear. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. After that day, everything changed. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in quiet, satisfying ripples that reached every corner of their lives. Megan was still the same woman on the surface. Perfectly dressed, polished tone, the kind who smiled too sweetly at neighbors, and posted number-blessed selfies on weekends. But behind those photos, her confidence had cracked like glass. I could tell because the calls started coming, first from Ethan, then, surprisingly, from her. The first call came a week later. Ethan sounded worn out. Mom, he sighed. I think Megan's still upset about the house. She says she feels like you pulled the rug out from under her. I stirred my tea and smiled faintly. I didn't pull the rug, dear. I just bought the floor beneath it. He groaned softly. Can you just, maybe, talk to her? She feels like you're punishing her. I thought about that for a moment. Punishment isn't my goal, I said. But perhaps it's time she learns that words have weight, and so do actions. He didn't reply right away. When he finally spoke, his tone was quieter. I know she was wrong, Mom. What she said to you that night was cruel. I should have stopped her. My heart softened a little. You were caught between two people you love, Ethan. I understand. But Megan wasn't ready to understand. A few days later, she called me directly. I could hear the forced politeness in her voice. Clara, I think we need to have a serious talk about the house situation. Of course, I said evenly. What would you like to discuss? Well, she started, her voice tight. It's just awkward, living in a house that we don't technically own. It doesn't feel right. I can imagine, I replied. Must be difficult realizing you're not the queen of the castle after all. There was a pause. Then, clipped words. I'm just saying it's not sustainable long term. I agree, I said, which is why I've decided to draft a rental agreement. You'll both pay a fair market rate. That should make things perfectly clear. The silence that followed was delicious. I could practically hear her trying to swallow her pride through the phone. You're charging us rent? She finally snapped. Well, Megan, I said kindly, if I'm the owner and you're the tenants, that's how things usually work. She hung up without another word. When Ethan called later that evening, I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. Mom, she's furious. She says you're trying to ruin her life. I chuckled softly. No, dear. I'm teaching her how to live it properly. Over the next few weeks, things got interesting. Megan, once the ruler of her own little kingdom, was suddenly having to answer to me about maintenance, about payments, about respect. Every request she made now came with a polite please and thank you. When I visited one Sunday, I noticed something different. She opened the door herself. No eye rolls, no fake smile, just quiet civility. "Would you like some tea?" she asked. "Sure," I said. "That would be lovely." She poured the tea carefully, her hands steady but her eyes guarded. I could tell she was measuring every word. "I want to apologize," she finally said. "I shouldn't have spoken to you that way. It was disrespectful." For a moment, I studied her. Not the polished version of her, not the filtered, pretentious image she showed the world, but the vulnerable, uncomfortable woman sitting before me, realizing that her pride had cost her more than she ever intended. "I appreciate that," I said quietly. "Apologies mean something when they're genuine." She nodded. "They are." And just like that, something in the air shifted. From then on, she treated me differently. Not perfectly. No one changes overnight, but there was a visible difference. When I visited, she made sure I had a comfortable seat. When she spoke, she used softer tones. And slowly, the hostility faded. But there was one thing still left unspoken. The lesson I wanted her to truly understand. A month later, I decided to test her. I called Ethan and asked if I could stay over for a few days while some repairs were being done at my place. He said yes immediately. Megan hesitated, but agreed. When I arrived, I noticed something beautiful. They had prepared the guest room for me. Not the couch, not the floor, a real bed, with clean sheets and flowers by the window. "Welcome, Clara," Megan said. "We thought you'd like a little comfort." I smiled. How thoughtful. That night, as we sat down for dinner, Ethan looked relaxed, genuinely happy to see the peace between us. And for the first time, Megan joined in, laughing softly, even sharing stories from her childhood. After dinner, she lingered in the kitchen while Ethan went to make a call. "Clara," she said quietly, "I know I made a terrible first impression. I don't expect you to forgive me easily, but I'm trying." "I can see that," I said gently, "and that's all I ever wanted, for you to understand that kindness isn't weakness." She smiled faintly. "And I guess control isn't power." Exactly. When I left 2 days later, the air between us felt lighter. She even hugged me, awkwardly, but sincerely. On my way home, I thought about how life has a funny way of bringing balance. People who once made you small eventually learn humility in ways they never expected. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Megan. Inside was a note that read, "Thank you for teaching me the kind of woman I should have been from the start. I've been volunteering at a women's shelter lately, helping people who've lost their homes. I think I finally understand how much that roof over our heads means." I folded the letter slowly, smiling to myself. Maybe she really had changed. Ethan called that evening. "Mom," she told me about the letter. "She said she finally gets why you did what you did." "That makes me happy," I said softly. Sometimes love means letting someone face their own reflection. There was a pause. "You know, Mom," he said, "you're the strongest woman I know." And for once, I didn't deflect the compliment. "Maybe," I said. "But strength isn't about what you take. It's about what you choose to give back." Months passed, and peace finally settled like soft dust over everything that had once been chaotic. Ethan and Megan found a rhythm that didn't revolve around pride or control, and I found a strange satisfaction in watching it unfold quietly from the sidelines. One crisp morning, I received an invitation in the mail, a handwritten card from Ethan and Megan. Dinner at our place. No reason, just family. I smiled when I saw it. No drama, no apologies wrapped in sarcasm, no veiled tension, just family. When I arrived, the house looked different, warmer somehow. The once minimalist cold decor had hints of life, a few photographs, children's toys, flowers on the windowsill. Megan greeted me with a real smile this time, the kind that reached her eyes. "Come in, Clara," she said softly. "We've been waiting for you." Ethan hugged me tightly. "Mom, you look great. How's retirement treating you?" "Oh, I'm keeping busy," I said. Real estate keeps me entertained." He laughed, not realizing how loaded that statement was. Megan, though, caught it, and her smirk held respect, not resentment. At dinner, the table was full. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, salad, and a homemade apple pie. I noticed something. Megan had set an extra plate, even though there were only 3 of us. "That's for Emily," she explained, smiling at my confusion. "We're expecting." My fork froze midair. "You mean?" Ethan grinned ear to ear. "You're going to be a grandma, Mom." For a moment, words escaped me. Tears welled in my eyes. "Oh, Ethan. Megan, that's wonderful news." Megan reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. "We wanted you to be the first to know. We wouldn't have this peace, this home, or even the courage to start a family if it weren't for what you taught us." That moment, quiet, genuine, and pure, felt like life's apology for every cruel word that had ever been said. Later that evening, after dinner, Ethan and Megan showed me the nursery. Soft pastels, tiny clothes, a crib that still had the price tag hanging from it. Megan looked around the room and said quietly, "When you bought the house, I thought you were cruel. Now I realize you were saving us from ourselves." I smiled gently. Life has a funny way of teaching through discomfort. You can't learn gratitude until you lose comfort. You can't understand family until you risk losing it. She nodded, her eyes shining. "I guess I needed to grow up before becoming a mother." "Then this little one is lucky," I said softly. A few months later, baby Emily was born. Holding her for the first time was like touching the start of a new chapter, one written with forgiveness instead of resentment. Ethan and Megan became better people through the hardship. They worked harder, argued less, and learned the meaning of partnership. I quietly supported them from behind the scenes, helping when needed, but never interfering. Then one day, something unexpected happened. Ethan called me and said, "Mom, Megan and I have been thinking, we want to buy the house from you. Properly this time." I hesitated. "You're sure you're ready for that responsibility?" "Yes," he said. "We want to earn it, not just live in it." His words struck something deep within me. The same boy who once stood silent while his wife disrespected me now spoke with maturity and humility. "All right," I said finally. "We'll arrange the paperwork, but only under one condition." "What's that?" "That the deed stays in both your names. Equality from the ground up." He agreed without hesitation. The following week, we met at the lawyer's office. Megan was there too, calm, respectful, and grateful. She handed me a small gift bag. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a charm that read, "Home isn't a place, it's the people who build it." I looked up at her, touched. "It's beautiful," she smiled. "It's a reminder that even when I was at my worst, you were teaching me how to be better." We signed the papers. The house officially became theirs. I thought that moment would feel like a loss, but instead, it felt like freedom, the closing of a circle. Later that evening, Ethan and Megan hosted a small celebration dinner, just family and a few close friends. When the night ended, Ethan raised his glass and said, "To my mother, the strongest woman I know, you taught me that love doesn't always come with comfort, but it always comes with meaning." Everyone clinked their glasses. Megan nodded in agreement. "And to Clara," she added softly, who turned the words "sleep on the floor" into a lesson I'll never forget. The room erupted in laughter, warm and full of heart. I sat there, quietly watching the people I loved most finally understand the meaning of respect, the kind that isn't demanded, but earned through grace, patience, and wisdom. When I left that night, Megan walked me to the car. "Clara," she said, "I don't think I ever told you this properly. Thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled. "You just needed someone to remind you who you could be." She laughed softly. "And maybe I needed a little shock to the system." "Sometimes," I said, "life's most painful lessons are the ones that build the strongest foundations." I drove home under the moonlight, feeling lighter than I had in years. The war that had once consumed our family had ended not with revenge, but with understanding. And as I looked at the stars, I whispered to myself, some battles are worth fighting not to destroy, but to rebuild stronger than before. Years later, on a quiet Christmas Eve, I found myself sitting by the same fireplace where so many of our family's storms had once begun. But tonight, the air was different, calm, warm, filled with laughter from the next room where little Emily, now 7 years old, was helping her parents decorate the tree. I could hear her small voice giggling. "Daddy, the star goes on top." Ethan laughed. "Only if Grandma says it straight." I smiled, sipping my tea. It was strange, how life circles back, how the same day that once broke your heart can become the very symbol of peace. Megan entered the room, holding a tray of cookies. "Clara, do you still like the almond ones?" "Always," I said with a grin. She sat beside me, quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Do you ever think about that Christmas Eve, the one that started all this?" I looked at the flickering fire. Every now and then, not with anger though, more like remembering an old wound that healed into a scar, one that reminds you of what not to forget. She nodded. "I was so foolish then, arrogant. I thought respect was something you demanded, not something you earned." "And now?" I asked. "Now," she said, smiling, "I realize respect is a gift, given freely only to those humble enough to value it." Just then, Emily came running in, holding a small wrapped box. "Grandma, I made you something at school." She handed it to me with wide, excited eyes. I carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a little clay ornament, slightly crooked, painted gold, with the words, "Family equals love plus forgiveness." My eyes filled with tears. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Emily hugged me tightly. "Daddy said you taught us that." Ethan, standing by the doorway, smiled. She did. The night continued with laughter, music, and quiet gratitude. As the clock neared midnight, snow began to fall outside, soft and slow, blanketing the street in white. The same neighborhood where I once stood in the cold, locked out by pride and pain, was now glowing with warmth. After everyone had gone to bed, I stepped outside alone for a moment. The cold air bit gently at my cheeks, but I didn't mind. The stillness felt alive somehow, humming with peace. I remembered that first night, the sting of rejection, the hollow silence of an empty porch, the burning humiliation of being treated as disposable. Back then, I thought my silent counterattack, donating their priceless gifts, was an act of revenge. But it wasn't. It was an awakening. Because sometimes, to teach others the value of love and respect, you must let go of what they take for granted, even if it breaks your heart in the process. From that pain, something extraordinary had grown. A family reborn not through comfort, but through truth. The house, once a battlefield of egos, was now filled with harmony. Megan had become more than a daughter-in-law. She was my friend, my ally, and sometimes, my mirror. Ethan had become a man, not because of money or property, but because he learned humility, the kind that shapes character quietly. And little Emily, she was the living proof that cycles can be broken, that love, when rebuilt with care, becomes stronger than pride. As I turned to go back inside, I noticed a soft golden glow through the window, the Christmas tree lights reflecting on the glass. For a second, I saw my younger self there, tired, heartbroken, standing in the cold, and then I saw her smile back at me before fading into the light. It felt like closure. The next morning, Christmas Day, the house was alive again with laughter. Megan insisted I sit while she cooked breakfast. "It's your turn to be spoiled," she said playfully. When everyone gathered around the table, Ethan raised a toast to new beginnings and to the woman who taught us what family truly means. Megan added softly, "And to second chances, the ones we almost didn't deserve, but got anyway." I smiled through my tears. "And to forgiveness, the kind that builds homes stronger than any brick or deed ever could." The clinking of glasses echoed softly as sunlight streamed through the windows. Later that day, Ethan walked me to my car. "Mom," he said, hesitating for a moment, "I never really asked. Do you regret it? Donating those gifts?" I looked at him, smiling faintly. "Not for a second. Sometimes, to rebuild what's real, you have to let go of what's fake." He nodded slowly, understanding now what he couldn't years ago. You know, he said, that was the day you stopped being just my mother. You became my teacher. I touched his cheek. And you became my reason to keep believing in family. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ethan and Megan standing in the snow, little Emily between them, waving with her mittened hands. The world seemed softer that day, the kind of softness that only comes after hard lessons, forgiveness, and love rediscovered. And as the snowflakes danced across the windshield, I whispered the words that had carried me through every storm